IP Stretch, 7 videos stretching you further on your IP journey. This video is on Interact, and it just didn't seem right to prepare some long, interesting, engaging talk. We're just going to have a bit of a chat. We're the person you can't see, but sat over there is Alex, and Alex is just going to ask me some questions, and I may pick up this board in time, and we'll see, about Interact.
So Richard, just remind us, why is Interact so key for an inspirational presenter?
So many presentations, the audience can just sit back and relax and almost be passive in the whole affair, when almost always you want them, like I'm now, actually figuratively or literally sitting forward, engaged. You want their brain engaged. And Interact is one of the most powerful, certainly one of the easiest ways of doing that. Letting go of some of the control yourself and actually opening, bringing them in some way, shape or form, which just makes it much more engaging, much more in the moment, much more about us today. It does all sorts of very powerful things, just making it more engaging and interesting, and in the end, successful.
But what's one of the most common mistakes made by even an inspirational presenter when it comes to the interaction?
I think as people start interacting more, I still find them forming a bit too big a box. And what I mean by that is they'll ask, if they're asking for something from the audience, they'll still do it in a very broad way. I've just covered this stuff. Have you got any questions? That's a pretty big box you're asking the audience to respond to. They've got a lot of things. Have I got any questions? I've got 4 questions. Which is the most important question? Can I form that into a sensible sentence? Am I going to sound, sensible if I ask? There's lots of things they're then worrying about. You're throwing this big thing out. Whereas the more surgical you can be, more precise you can be in the question, the better the response generally. So rather than big box, have you got any questions? Slightly smaller box, what's been one part of what I've talked about which has surprised you most? Or, is there anything in particular here that you want me to clarify? Or, anything in here that actually reminds you of some of your experience in the business. That's a big-ish box, but be a little bit more surgical in terms of what you ask people. With a little bit of thought can just help direct an audience in terms of what you want.
And if you've got a particularly large audience to talk to, where you feel more distant from the audience, how do you encourage interaction at that level?
So I would build, is what often I do. I mean, sometimes if it's a fun audience and they're warmed up and you're warmed up, you can just dive. You can get an audience to do all sorts of things very quickly. But if in doubt, you build a little bit. So one is you get some group activity stuff, and obviously the obvious one is put your hands up if. Get them largely all responding. And I probably get something where they can all respond and then some of them can respond. So they're used to that sense of call and respond. Secondly is it depends on the scenario, absolutely, but the classic one is not just, someone call out a question. That there's a lot of onus on that one person. You'll end up getting the biggest extrovert being the one who talks, and they're not always the one you want to talk to. So give each of them a bit more confidence by getting them to talk to each other first. Hey, look, I'm going to talk about a bunch of things today around this topic, but actually, look, just find someone next to you, talk to them about what you're most keen to learn about this topic. Look, I'll give you, a couple of minutes, go. They talk to their partner, and it's amazing how that talking to someone else gives even some of the less extrovert types the confidence to go, actually, here's what I want to know about. Or for that matter, often what happens is person A talks to person B, person A has an idea, and person B then goes, I've got one. This person I'm with, Joan, just had this thought, which I thought was really intelligent. Their idea goes through someone else who ends up being their projector, their speaker for their idea, things like that. So everyone responds, go through a paired sort of process to then pass out. Find ways to make it easy for the audience to do it. We've got over our nerves to stand in front of a group of people. We underestimate that as soon as you're asking for a response from an individual from the audience, you're asking them to go through the very thing that you're needing to do, but you haven't given them the chance to prepare. it's not surprising they don't jump up immediately and want to talk to you.
So what's the one thing that you'd encourage someone to try if they really want to push themselves in the interaction area?
I guess what comes to mind is stretch across the spectrum of interacting is one answer to that question. And where they are will vary from all of us. But if really, when we talk about spectrum, in my case, we talk about sort of to what level of response you're expecting from the audience, from rhetorical questions, just visualize, remember a time type stuff, all the way through to up to the other end is, I need 4 volunteers to come up on the stage and do cartwheels, and everything in between, the amount you're really asking and how much you're, letting go of control to the audience. I suppose if you're finding you're mostly doing something in one area, is try some of the others. So if you do a lot of rhetorical questions, great, but can you do something where they are more literally getting into a conversation? Or on the other side, if you're doing lots of questions, lots of Q&A, that's great, but actually can you pull that back into something more where you're getting them to think, they're having to respond but in their own heads or to someone next to them or something a bit different from just having that Q&A all the time?
What's the most creative interaction technique you've ever seen?
Oh, that's a horrible question. All sorts. So, I've seen some quite... I'll tell you one. So I'm a member of something called the Applied Improvisation Network. I better tell you what that is. Improvisers, improvisational comedians, improvisational theatre. Some people do improv for social good, actually working with damaged kids and stuff like that. But the people around the world who are practitioners in this area, they come together once a year, different places. And I've been to a couple of their conferences. And as you can imagine, they're an interesting bunch, but they're not all wild and wacky. Plenty of them are actually in business. Plenty of them are, it's about the application of this stuff. But they do, and they have people up at the front and they do all sorts of things. But the one I always remember, and I suppose it wasn't that wild or wacky, but it was a theatre of 300 people, day one of this 3-day conference, people from around the world. But what they had to do, the interaction was the person at the front said, okay, we want to see who's here. What I want you to do is stand up and say hello in your language, but as groups. So we were in the UK, we were in Oxford in the UK. So by definition, those people in the UK stood up as one and went, hello. But the next group all had to go, but going further away from Oxford. So this is asking an audience to basically instantaneously self-organize about when is the right time to stand up and what language they're going to say and how they know what. And my first thought was, how can this work? It was easy for me. I was from the UK. I just stood up at the beginning. But what was so magical was watching people sort of make it work. A few people would stand and they'd sort of look, no, actually, I'm Germany, you're France. Germany will sit down, France will do it, and then Germany. And the further away from the UK you got, because we had people from like Manila, we had people from Australia, and actually it just self-organized in a way which was wonderful. So normally we would just do, who's here from France, and people put some hands up. But actually putting that activity in and just letting people self-organize was wonderful. So that's an example. Great. So that was us, rather than doing some straight formal content, just answering a few questions on the topic of interact. Thanks for listening.